All right, let's talk about what just happened in this hearing. Because this was not politics as usual. This was a constitutional collision, live and unfiltered. Congressman Dan Goldman went head-to-head with Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, and what unfolded was a stunning display of executive defiance in the face of a unanimous Supreme Court ruling. This wasn't about left versus right, or even immigration policy. This was about whether the Constitution still matters when it becomes inconvenient. A cabinet secretary, under oath, refused to explain how her department is complying with a 9-0 Supreme Court order and instead tried to shout down due process itself. And if that doesn't alarm you, it should, because what you're about to hear is what the erosion of the rule of law sounds like in real time.
I now recognize Mr. Goldman for 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to go back to Mr. Kilmar Abrego-Garcia's case, Madam Secretary. But my first question for you is a pretty simple one. It's basic civics. Which branch of government does the Constitution give the authority to interpret what the law is, the judiciary or the executive branch?
Sir, going forward, the interpretation of the law, you make the laws in this body. The judicial branch makes sure that they have integrity and they're applied properly to individuals.
So okay. So I'm just going to take that as the judiciary branch. Now, let's focus for a second on what the judiciary branch has said about this case. We know the Supreme Court has said 9-0 that, notwithstanding your statements under oath here today, that Mr. Kilmar Abrego-Garcia was afforded due process. He was, in fact, not afforded due process, because then if he were, you would have seen the withholding order that did not permit him to be deported to El Salvador. Now, you allege, and I guess the Attorney General alleges, that he's a member of MS-13. That may very well be the case. And if he is, now that that is a foreign terrorist organization, certainly the immigration laws would allow him, and in fact require him, to be deported. I certainly would support that. But the problem that we have here is what you allege, what Ms. Green alleges, what the Attorney General alleges, is not the judiciary. You don't get to decide whether or not he is an MS-13 member. And you don't have to take my word for it, because Judge Wilkinson, a Fourth Circuit judge, very conservative, addressed this argument. He said, the government asserts that Abrego-Garcia is a terrorist and a member of MS-13. Perhaps, but perhaps not. Regardless, he is still entitled to due process. If the government is confident in its position, it should be assured that position will prevail in proceedings to terminate the withholding of removal order. Will you commit right now to give Mr. Abrego-Garcia that process where you can prove your allegation that he is a member of MS-13?
Congressman, that judge that you just quoted did not say he was not a member of MS-13. Who did say that he was a member of MS-13 was law enforcement officers that encountered this individual.
Yeah, he knows that. This is a Fourth Circuit judge. He knows all of what the evidence is, and he's saying if that evidence... So you're not going to commit to follow this order? You won't commit to follow this court order?
By the way, he identified
Madam Secretary,
himself.
I reclaim my time. Stop filibustering. Stop filibustering.
By gang members of MS-13.
Will you give Mr. Abrego-Garcia the due process that the Supreme Court and Judge Wilkinson has required you to give him?
Abrego-Garcia is an El Salvador resident who is in his home country. If he were to come back to this country, he would be immediately removed again.
How do you know?
He has received and been treated appropriately,
so
sir, and he is not.
How can you say he's been treated appropriately if the Supreme Court has ruled 9-0? 9-0 that he hasn't been treated appropriately? Why is your opinion better and have more authority than the Supreme Court?
Investigators, 2 judges, an immigration court that all said he was MS-13 and was removed from this country.
But you understand, that is you saying that. That is you saying that.
That is them saying that. This
no.
is investigators and law enforcement
you making that determination.
Against him. If you don't
the court has considered all that. The judge has considered all that, Madam Secretary. And if you would be quiet, because I'm reclaiming my time, You are not following this court order. But let's focus on the court order, because this opinion also says that to facilitate, which the Supreme Court is requiring, is an active verb. It requires that steps be taken. What steps have you taken to return Mr. Abrego Garcia to allow him to get due process?
Abrego Garcia is in his home country.
What
If he were to come
steps
back,
have
your
you
advocacy-
taken?
If your continued advocacy for him were to...
I'm not advocating for him.
Yes, you
I'm
are.
advocating for a
Absolutely.
court order, Madam
Gone to the
Secretary.
mat for this
The
man
court
who
order
has terrorized
says
people
that
in
you
traffic
must take
and human
steps
beings.
to follow the court order. You are here under oath. What steps have you taken to return Mr. Abrego Garcia pursuant to this court order?
It's got to be extremely discouraging to be one of your constituents. To see you fight for a terrorist like this and not fight for them is extremely alarming to me.
I'm fighting for due.
So let me slow this down, because what you just heard is not heated rhetoric or political theater. This is a cabinet secretary under oath, being walked step by step through basic constitutional law and still refusing to acknowledge who actually runs the rulebook in this country. Congressman Dan Goldman starts exactly where you have to start in moments like this. Kindergarten-level civics. Who interprets the law? And once Kristi Noem concedes, however awkwardly, that it's the judiciary, the trap snaps shut. Because from that moment on, everything she says is in direct conflict with a unanimous Supreme Court ruling, 9-0. Not liberal judges, not conservative judges, all of them. And yet, instead of respecting that ruling, we watch the executive branch do something deeply dangerous, substitute its own opinion for binding law. Goldman isn't defending Kilmar Abrego Garcia. He says that repeatedly. What he's defending is due process, and that distinction matters more than anything else in this exchange. Because once the government can label someone a terrorist and skip the courts, the Constitution becomes optional. Notice how Noem never actually answers the core question. What steps has DHS taken to comply with the Supreme Court's order? She dodges, reframes, attacks, and finally accuses Goldman of fighting for a terrorist, which is the oldest trick in the authoritarian playbook. When you can't defend the law, you smear the person demanding it. And here's the moment that should make every American uneasy: the word facilitate. Goldman points out correctly that it's an active verb. It requires action. It requires compliance. And Noem has nothing. No steps, no plan, no acknowledgement that her department is bound by the courts at all. That's not a policy disagreement. That's an executive branch openly flirting with defiance of the Supreme Court. When Goldman says, "I'm fighting for due process under the Constitution," that's not a talking point. That's a warning. Because if the law only applies when the executive agrees with it, then we are no longer governed by courts. We're governed by power.